Hello everybody and welcome back to Gaskin Points. Today I have a little bit different of a video. Today I'm going to be telling the story that I don't think has been told just yet, of how two hazmat-proof Stagg Jr. store picks were stolen in Kentucky. How the bottles were resold on the secondary market for tens of thousands of dollars. How the stores had absolutely no idea and only eventually found out weeks later. And then in the second half of this video, we're actually going to sit down and try those bottles and just see how good they really are. So let's get right into it. This story starts back in February. On February 7th, 2025, many people woke up to seeing about 30 bottles of a particular Stagmat hazmat pick being resold on the secondary markets. Now, the secondary markets tend to work relatively slow when it comes to Stagg hazmat picks. I speculate there's only been somewhere between 10 and 20 on the American markets, and not that many more than that on the international markets that have actually turned out to be hazmat proof. So when one is sold, it definitely gets notice. And the standard market at the time for these bottles would have been about $450 to $500 for the 142.2 proof they were commanding. But why was it that there were 6 to 7 different people that all seemed to be selling exactly 5 or 6 bottles of this whiskey? Well, it turns out that this pick was for a store called Sunset Mart. There was just one issue. Sunset Mart is in California, yet these people that were selling them were all in Kentucky. And when people reached out to Sunset Mart, asking them how they had allowed people to resell their bottles to such an extent, well, they didn't seem to know what was going on. Their Stagg barrel was supposed to arrive in March. However, it was still February 7th. And so they initially speculated that people were just misusing their stickers. That somehow they'd gotten their hands on these stickers and some other liquor store in Kentucky ended up getting a barrel that said their name on it, but it was a completely different barrel. And ultimately, that's where the story would land. We wouldn't really hear anything else. After a few days, the secondary market, of course, plummeted on these bottles as people were selling them for whatever they could get their hands on. And so they were selling them for $450, $425, $400, $375, and ultimately leveling around that $375 to $400 range. And then things got quiet again. But then 2 weeks later, the exact same thing happened. A Stagg hazmat barrel, 140.4 proof, from BevMax, a retail store that exists only in Connecticut, had another Stagg hazmat barrel that was being sold on the secondary market in great quantities. Now, as somebody from Connecticut myself, I was very surprised by this. I hadn't heard that BevMax had a Stagg hazmat pick, and as somebody that spent tens of thousands of dollars in BevMaxes here in Connecticut, I figured that I probably would have heard something from somebody if they actually had this barrel. Yet once again, the people reselling them were in Kentucky. And so, again, many people bought this bottle. The secondary market that should have been probably about $400 since it was hazmat ends up dropping to nearly $300 as people are just rushing to get as much money as they possibly can for these bottles, flipping them as quickly as they possibly can. While I won't go into the exact servers that this happened on, the exact names of the people that happened, there did seem to be a little bit of overlap. While it wasn't a perfect overlap, there were a few select people that were both reselling the 142.2 proof Sunset Mart pick in early February that were reselling this BevMax hazmat pick in mid-February. So what happened? Well, when Sunset Mart was questioned, they didn't know anything. But a month later, a post surfaced on their Instagram page where they said that their Stagg hazmat pick had been stolen. That right off of the truck that was heading to California at the time, their pick had been taken and then flipped on the secondary market for tens of thousands of dollars. Now, ultimately, while it was about 30 bottles on the first day, probably about 50 to 60 ended up surfacing on the secondary market, all for at least $375. And if we do the math, it's about $25,000 worth of this one Stagg barrel that had been flipped on the secondary market that had been stolen. Now, Sunset Mart was eventually given a new barrel, and yet, while we aren't sure that it's hazmat, we will see. They seem content, but these bottles still continue to be on the secondary market today. BevMax was a little bit more complicated. BevMax, we actually never heard anything from. They are a retail store with 13 different stores here in Connecticut, and because of that, there isn't really one central hub that one can easily communicate with this, at least from the consumer perspective. However, I spoke with several retail stores here in Connecticut, even many that are in the same cities as BevMax's, And it turns out that the story gets a little bit more complicated. That in February, the train that was carrying Connecticut's Sazerac allocations, the Weller Full Proofs, the Stagg Junior batches, and some of these store picks, including this BevMax pick, was hijacked. People ended up looting this train for what many people speculate was at least $100,000 in retail on Sazerac allocations. All the liquor stores in the area, my area, ended up not getting the Staggs that they were expecting, the Wellers that they were expecting, and eventually we just didn't end up really hearing anything after that. That eventually Connecticut just didn't get those allocations on that month. But because of the nature of Sazerac allocations, eventually, March came, people got some of their allocations, they just figured that there weren't enough to go around in February, they didn't think too much of it. And so it seems as if both the Sunset Mart and the BevMax pick were stolen in Kentucky. One was stolen straight off of the train that was heading northeast, one was stolen off of a truck that was heading out to California. People resold these bottles and nobody really asked any questions. To my understanding, nobody's been arrested for this. It's made no national headlines, even though at least $50,000 worth of just Stagg Hazmat barrels with these two barrels were stolen, and likely far more than that has been stolen that we don't even know about. However, I speculate that it gets even more complicated than that, because I've kept really close track of Stagg Junior since I've joined this hobby. And Stagg Juniors haven't really had all that many hazmats. Because we've only had about 10 to 20 in the American market, and only a couple international, it's actually not that hard to track down pretty much all that exists in the American market. But it turns out that in February and March, 5 released. One went to California at 146.6 proof to a store called MGA. A second went to Montana at 142.8 proof. A third went to New Jersey to a store called Marlowe, also 142.8 proof. This Sunset Mart was 142.2 proof. This BevMax was 140.4 proof. 5 hazmat Stagg barrels, all back to back, and 2 of them were stolen. And so I speculate, given all this information, the fact that they were stolen and nobody's really told the story at all, we've heard no arrests, we've heard no reports from Buffalo Trace, and the fact that this just so happened to be the time in which there were Stagg Hazmat barrels, so coincidentally, and 2 of those 5 were stolen, I think this may have been an inside job. I think there may have been some intel that were told to these people that it seems as if these people must have known that there were Stagg Hazmat barrels to be stolen in the first place, because the difference in value between a 138 proof Stagg pick is about $250 versus a Stagg Hazmat at 140 that before this was going to be about $400 to $450. And so the fact that these people knew that this one barrel where the retail was going to be the same, but the secondary market was about 50% higher just because they were hazmat, it just seems all too coincidental that Buffalo Trace didn't know anything about it, and that these people just so happened to steal 2 Stagg Hazmat barrels. And so that's the story. We have BevMax Hazmat stolen barrel, we have Sunset's Hazmat stolen barrel. BevMax will likely be given another Stagg barrel soon, though they really haven't come out and said anything about it. Sunset Mart did tell us that they will be getting another barrel, that Sazerac has come back and given them one, and so we'll see. But, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you those 2 bottles here today. And we're going to try them, and we're going to find out if they're all that good in the first place. So let's get right into it. So, I'm going to warm up here with a little bit of Stagg Junior Batch 18, a little bit lower of a proof at 130, just to warm our palates a little bit before we get into the hazmats. There's very rich caramel on this, vanilla, it's a very solid pour, a nice oak presence on it, some nice spice, nutmeg and cinnamon. Gives us an idea of Stagg Junior. It's rich, it's decadent. I think for $60, continues to be one of the best bottles on the market at retail. And even the secondary market on these batch products at around $150, really not all too bad. But let's try the BevMax pick. So this is 140.4 proof. On the nose, it's pretty hot. There's quite a bit of caramel on this. There's a really strong raisin on this, some really strong dried fruit on this as well. Yeah, definitely a little bit of vanilla in there as well, some spice. But I will say the dates, the dried fruits, the raisins, that's definitely the most prominent note that I'm getting here. Let's try it. That packs a punch. Well, that's good. So the dried fruit is definitely the most prominent note. through the palate. Then there's a really rich leather on it as well. You get a little bit of vanilla and caramel, a little bit of spice on that. Oh, that's nice. Definitely doesn't drink Hazmat. Now, I haven't proofed these bottles, and honestly, one day, if the story continues to develop, it may be worth trying to proof them to even see if they're actually Hazmat in the first place, or if the proof on these bottles were actually different. Because it wouldn't surprise me at this point if they were written down as a different proof than what they actually were to just sell more on the secondary market. But this tastes pretty good. Let's take a second sip here. It's rich, dried fruit on it, vanilla on it. I think it doesn't drink very closely to a lot of the batches I've had. That dried fruit mixed with the leather, definitely a different kind of flavor note. But let's move on to the Sunset Mart. So this was obviously the first barrel that was stolen. It smells much softer on the nose. This one actually smells very similar to just the standard Stagg batch here. Very similar flavor profile. There's vanilla, there's cherry, there's oak, there's that leather, a little bit of that nutmeg spice, cinnamon spice on here. Let's take a sip. It's actually pretty soft. It's a pretty mellow pour. Doesn't really jump out on you. Doesn't really drink anywhere close to Hazmat. And I don't mean that as a compliment. I mean that as this drinks as if it was a 125 proof and has the flavor as if it was 125 proof. The BevMax, though, definitely more unique, definitely drank hotter, which is interesting. Does make me speculate as to whether or not these are actually Hazmat. They are probably actually Hazmat barrels. It did seem like Sunset Mart had thought that this was obviously their original barrel, which they seem to know was Hazmat. Obviously, we just know nothing from BevMax. I tried to reach out to them. There was no response at all. So maybe if this story develops, I'll give an updated video. But it's just a little bit surprising that 2 Stagg barrels can get stolen like that and just nobody talks about it. Let's take a second sip. It's good. It tastes very similar to your standard Stagg batch. A little bit more flavor towards the late palate. Definitely opens up to a little bit of dried fruit, which is nice. But it starts in the beginning with the caramel, the vanilla, the leather, your kind of oak spice on there. It's pretty standard. I'm not particularly impressed with the Sunset Mart. I actually do like the BevMax a little bit more, because at least it's a little bit more niche. But actually, we'll take one more sip here, and then we'll give everything a rating. Yeah, it's good. It's good. I would rate that an 8.3. Solid pour, not worth $400. At retail, an absolute steal. Let's try this BevMax one more time. Give it a rating here. Yeah, it's just richer. The oak tastes older. The dried fruit is really unique. I like that. I don't love it. I think the flavor profile on the Sunset Mart is actually a little bit better. But I think because this is more unique, I think it's more flavorful. I would rate this an 8.4. So still not really worth that secondary market on it, but solid. And then standard good old batch 18 here. This has long been an 8.1 for me. It's just so solid. It has everything you could want in a weekly sipper. And for $150 on the secondary market, I get it. I get why people pay that on Staggs. So good. Obviously, very soft in comparison to these other two, probably Hazmat pours. But anyways, that's the video. So let me know down below in the comments what you guys think. If any of you have any information on what happened with these barrels, if any of you know these retail stores, especially the one in California, and what they think about this and what happened with this, definitely let me know down below in the comments. I think this is pretty crazy, and I've been very surprised that people haven't been talking about this. And the whiskey itself was also pretty good. But anyways, I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.